Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Rashmita, and I am the event planner for Microsoft Reactor India. This session will run over the next 60 minutes, including Q&A. But before we begin today's session, please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We are all here to learn together, so please be respectful of other people's views, understanding of differences, being kind and considerate in the way you engage. The chat section will be open throughout, and we do encourage you all to participate. So please feel free to drop all your questions in the chat section. I would now like to welcome Saurav, our speaker for today's session. Saurav is a cloud solution architect at Microsoft and is passionate about contributing to the community through tech sessions. He is also a researcher and a hackathon enthusiast. But for now, I will hand over to Saurav to begin the session. Let me bring him into the stream.
Hi
There you
Rashmita,
go.
how are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing good. How are you?
Doing good as well. So great to be back.
Yes, yes, indeed. And Happy New Year to you, Saurav.
Same to you. Yeah.
Thank
And to
you.
the
Thank you.
amazing set of audience who are viewing us. So
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. So the stage is all yours. Your presentation is up. I'll be at the backstage. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So hello everyone. 1 minute. Hello everyone. So glad to be back in the new year and wish you all an amazing new year. We are good to get started on our new topic in a new year and get ourselves skilled on AZ-104, that is Azure Administrator. So without any ado, we'll quickly get started. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sourav Bera, as already Rashmita introduced. I'll not take time over here, but I'm a speaker, a judge, a mentor, and an open source contributor. I love doing research. So if you are someone who is really keen on doing research, feel free to connect with me. There goes my LinkedIn on the barcode, and would love to connect and know what you're doing. Well, we are in the series of learning and mastering Azure Administrator certification. And this is a comprehensive certification that not only caters to the identity and governance on Azure, the storage, compute, networking, backup, and whatnot. Well, we already covered, to get a quick recap, we already covered the identity and the storage part in the last two sessions. And that's where I'm super excited to talk about the compute, Azure Compute Services in today's session, right? Feel free to share your interest if you're really looking forward to learn on Azure Compute Services. And that's where we are. The first topic that we have in today's agenda is Azure virtual machines. I'm pretty sure everyone, each one of you are aware about and heard about Azure virtual machine in some or the other form. Many of you might have also used them in your personal project, and that's where we today dive into the details of how a virtual machine works, what a virtual machine is, and where can you leverage virtual machines, what are the different configurations that are required in order for you to get started and spin up your workloads in Azure Virtual Machine. Well, to give you a quick round of introduction, I would love to know your perspective on what do you understand from a virtual machine? How is it a different from an maybe a server environment? And what are the capabilities that you think that you can leverage an Azure virtual machine for? And at the same time, I'll share my perspective as well. So think about a physical server on a data center, right? A virtual machine can be thought of as a similar environment, which is just a logical hypervisor or a logical segmentation of the on-premise servers that you have. So on the on-premise environment, you have some sort of an hypervisor that segments the the kernel, which includes the CPU, RAM, the storage, and it creates a logical unit which is available to you on demand on Azure. That's a virtual machine, as simple as it is. Now, what are the different things that you can think about when you think about an Azure virtual machine? Well, we already talked about the compute. We already talked about the RAM. We talked about the storage. But how do we also connect to our virtual machine? That's where we also need a network, right? We would also need some level of monitoring as well, right? We are spinning up our virtual machine, we are running some application workloads on top of it. So that's where it is very critical for us to know what sort amount of traffic is coming to my application. Is my virtual machine being able to handle the traffic there? Is it reaching the bottleneck? And if it's reaching a bottleneck, what is the next step of action that we need to perform, right? I can understand for many of you this is totally new, and that's where we'll get to the portal, directly talk about each of them aspect, and let's get started with that. Okay, let me switch to my Azure portal, and I hope you are able to see the Azure portal, and that's where I'll just go to the global search bar and I'll type in virtual machine. Oops. Yeah, and there I go. So this is my virtual machine. I mean, this is the page that shows all my virtual machines. But I'm interested to create a new virtual machine and learn what are the different things that we need to take into consideration while creating a virtual machine. Now, when you click on the virtual create option, you see a couple of options. You see creating a virtual machine, creating a virtual machine with a preset configuration, or there are multiple other VM-based solutions that we'll explore. So first of all, let's quickly get ahead and create a virtual machine. As already said in the previous sessions, the subscription is a top in the hierarchy, which is a logical unit. That's where your resources get stored. And then you have a sub hierarchy or sub logical unit, which is a resource group that would store your individual resources. So let me choose my RG over here, which stands for resource group, and I'll give my virtual machine a name. So Azure admin VM. Okay, that sounds like a good name. I'll choose wherein I want to place my virtual machine. So Azure has more than 120 plus regions, and you want to decide upon where do you want to store these virtual machines, right? And this can be driven to multiple decision factors. Well, you can think about where are my users located, where am I located if I'm accessing my virtual machine, or is there a compliance in terms of the data that is being stored in the virtual machine? Is there a regional compliance that I need to store in a particular region? That's where you choose among the set of regions that are available on Azure. Okay, so I'll just go ahead with the Central India as my default, which is closest to me. Yeah, and then comes the next concept of availability zones. Now, what is availability zones? If you remember in the last session that I talked about, we talked about that, hey, Azure has multiple regions, and each region would not have a single data center. It can have a single data center. It can have more than one data centers as well. Likewise, just take an example of a region like Central India. In Central India, you would have more than one data centers, and each of these data centers are located in physically apart locations, which are called as zones or ability zones. So, what is the benefit of having these multiple data centers within each region? This ensures that even if one data center is down, my next data center is still running and supports the services or resources that are spin up. But for that, it is very important for me to ensure that my resources are running across at least two different ability zones, or it can be also between three ability zones. So a region would have three ability zones, and the best hierarchy option that you can do is you can spin up these resources across the three ability zones, right? Now think about it like three different virtual machines running in three different data centers, and even if one of them is down, you are still able to access the virtual machine in the separate region. So within the availability zone option, either I can choose to use a virtual machine scale set. That's something that I'll talk about at a later point. I can choose something about availability zone, which I talked about right now. And what is this availability set? Now think about a single data center, right? And within the single data center, you would have multiple fault domains and multiple update domains. What are these fault domains and update domains? Well, a data center is segregated into maybe three fault domains. And how are these identified? These are individual racks of servers which are independent to each other. Even if one of the rack is down, the next rack is still available and supports your resource. Now think about an update domain. Similarly, update domain would be 20 update domains within a single data center. Now let's say Microsoft Azure has to provide an upgrade to one of the set of servers or a single set of rack. Now, would they roll out all the updates into all of the racks at once? Well, that's not the case. They will roll out in a in a kind of a canary deployment wherein the update gets rolled out to the first rack, then to the second rack, the third rack, and meanwhile the third rack is getting updated. The first rack is still serving, right? This ensures that your data, your resource is still available to you even in case of an update or even in case of a fault. And that's where I'm especially talking about a fault domain. So ability set is where you can choose to place your resources across multiple fault domains to ensure that even if one of single rack faces a downtime or a failure, your resources are still available. So maybe in this scenario, I'll choose an ability set, and this asks me to create a new ability set. Let me just create a new ability set and show it to you. Okay, I'll create a new ability set. Yeah, and I'll provide a name, VM availability set. Yeah. And then I'll choose how do I want to configure my ability set. Is it across two fault domains? Is it across how many update domains? That's where I think five update domains is good. I'll choose it to be three fault domains. Let me just try. Okay, it does not allow me, so I'll just go ahead, at least ensuring that two ability sets uh, ensures me that, hey, if in case one of the rack is down, still my resources are available. But what in case of a disaster? And that's where I would like to store it in a ability zone, right? So in scenarios like a production environment, you're ideally supposed to store replicate your resource across multiple ability zones. Yeah. Now, within the security type, virtual machines has in Azure has its own security type. So you can go for a standard, you can go for a trusted launch virtual machine, which means while your virtual machine gets pinned up or boot up, there are driver checks that perform. There are certain security measures that needs to be taken into consideration during the boot up process, and that's where this is really important. Or you can go for a confidential virtual machine. Now, confidential virtual machine is the third category in place, wherein you can think about this is more in case of in case the data that resides in your virtual machine is highly confidential and you want to ensure that the data does not get lost. So that's where it is very important that you choose a confidential virtual machine. Now, it is also important. I think not about my server, right? But what sort of a operating system or a distro should I run on top of it? It could be a Windows machine, a Windows client. It could be a Windows server as well. It could be also a Linux server. In my case, I'll just quickly go ahead and spin up maybe a Windows Server 2022, and then I'll choose the VM architecture, which is x64. I'll choose the VM size. Now, this is very important. We talked about segregating or segmenting our logical virtual machine, or sorry, the physical virtual machine into multiple logical VM segments. So what is the capacity in terms of the CPU, the RAM, and the storage that we want to assign? That's what defines our size. So based on my need, based on what I want to run on these virtual machines, I would choose select the sizes, and I'll talk about these specific sizes in the next slide that I have. But just to give you an overview, there are multiple families of sizes being defined in Azure. And how do we grade this? So if you see, there are different categories, mostly used. If you see, there is D series, There is B series, there is F series, E series, L series, A series. There is something also called for N series, which is for your GPU based machines. You have something called for H series, which is for your HPC workloads. E series is for enterprise. Now, each of these families are segregated for a particular use case, and that is very easy to understand. When you just click on each of the series, you will be able to see L is for high throughput, low latency, and directly mapped to a local NVMe storage, right? E series, or maybe let's take a D series. So D series is for general purpose need. So I'll just maybe go for a D series queue. But what to be selected within the D series queue? That's where I'm interested to know what is the configuration that is aligned to my particular virtual machine size that I'm selecting, right? So what are the number of cores that I want to assign? Maybe I want need 8 cores. At the same time, I need a RAM of 32 GB minimum. I might not be utilizing the entire RAM, but I need a 32 GB RAM. I need the maximum data disk that can be attached is 16. The maximum IOPS is this much, and the local storage is 64 GBs, and so on and so forth. And then there is an associated cost to it. The higher the SKU, the higher is the cost. So let me select the D8SP3, which is a suitable option for me, and I will go ahead and provide the credentials that I need to log into my VM. So let me just give it just a random uh, username and a password. And this is something that is very important for you to ensure that these passwords are not getting leaked. Otherwise, anyone can have an access to your VM either through a public or a private channel. So I'll give a strong password. Let me just provide a password. And it seems like a strong one. And there you go. Now I chose how do I want to connect, or what are the ports that I want to expose for my virtual machine. If it's a production environment, I really don't want it to be on public internet, and that's where I might not allow the direct RDP access. For an administrator, I would like to provide an SSH access through maybe a private channel. If it's a web server, then I would like to provide an HTTPS or HTTP based access. Maybe I'll choose HTTPS, which is a more secure protocol. And then there's something called as Azure Hybrid Benefits. What is Azure Hybrid Benefits? I don't want to juggle with, I mean, keep you engaged with a lot of terms, but each virtual machine, the operating system that is running on top of it would require some sort of a licensing. Licensing is for the software assurance. And if you have your own licenses, you can bring your own license and you can get a discount on the pay cost or the pay as you go cost up to 49%. That's a huge number. So even if in case you have a Windows Server license, you can use that, and that's a feature that is provided on Azure to save your cost. If you're interested to know what is the cost that you're getting, so you will be able to see the monthly cost, estimated monthly cost, and that's where the Azure brings it up to you. You can choose the disk that you need, the OS disk, and the secondary disk that you need, which we call as a data disk. To the virtual machine. I'll choose the default as 127 GB with a primary SSD and a platform managed key. Now, this platform managed key means this is the encryption that I'm enabling on my disk. I can choose to make it a custom managed key, which ensures that I manage the key, and there's an advanced encryption standard that gets applied for the encryption protocol algorithm. Right now, the next is how do I want to set up the network for my virtual machine? I talked about a couple of important things: storage, network, monitoring, and much more than that. So that's where I want to provide maybe a particular VNet on which my virtual machine will be. I want to provide a public IP, okay, or I'll choose to create a new one. If in case the existing public IP is already in use, admin VM VIP, that's where I go ahead and I create my public IP. Uh, I choose that a network security group should be basic, which means this is a filtering. I mean, this is a tool, a network tool that allows to filter the traffic that is incoming to my um, virtual machine, right? And again, what are the public inbound ports that I want to allow? So I already mentioned that I want to allow HTTPS, SSH, and RTP access to my virtual machine. Okay. Do I want to place a load balancer in front of my virtual machine? Well, if it case I use something called as virtual machine scales, which we'll explore in the next step, I would love to use a load balancer on top of it. Yeah. The next is management. So in case of a management, what are the management operation that you want to perform on top of it? So do you want to enable intra id based access, and which is the best way to access your virtual machine? This is the most secure way. While also I want to enable auto shutdown, which means I mentioned that at 7 p.m. On the day, at every day my virtual machine will automatically get shut down, right? I want to enable backup maybe. So I can choose enable backup, and I provide a configuration. Ideally, backup gets stored in a recovery service vault. So that's where this is the storage unit for your backup, and which allows you to perform a lot of operation in terms of the long-term backup, instant restores, and stuff like that. So again, this is something that I want to configure. And if you want to perform guest OS updates to Azure Update Management and stuff like that, okay. Now, I mean, from the monitoring angle, I want to enable monitoring. Well, yes. One is application health monitoring, and the second is sort of an alerts. Okay, so I can define if my CPU usage exceeds 80%. That's where I want to, trigger an alert. And these are the different configurations that we can tweak. And you can send a notification when one of these conditions are met. It will trigger an alert, or maybe a mobile notification, or an email to Azure Resource Manager role as per the provider configuration, right? And this is pretty much that is required for you to get started on virtual machine. You can additionally provide an advanced extension, which is like a script that you want to deploy certain resources, perform certain patching and stuff like that on your VM. But I'll skip this for now for the sake of simplicity, and I'll provide the tags. So maybe I want to provide the resource type is, is VM, and you can provide as many resource tags. These are just like metadata that helps you identify resource, perform certain operations, and stuff like that. Well, I'm good to create my virtual machine, and it says there is some validation that failed. Oh, oops! I just created a policy that does not allow my virtual machine to be exposed on the public network. So over here, maybe I choose to the public IP as none, and then I'll review and create, and it should pass, and I should be able to create my virtual machine. That's where I'll allow it to create a virtual machine. Meanwhile, let's get back to our slides and talk about the next thing. So
Sort of
as already
before
said,
you go to the
when I want to spin up a virtual machine, there are Mhm.
Yeah, sorry, sorry to interrupt, Saurav. So there is a question from Gigi and Farhan. So if you don't mind, would you answer to those questions right now before you move on to the second
Sure,
slide?
sure. I would happy to. So,
Yeah.
would you like to just pop up the question?
Yes.
Okay, those Azure
So
virtual machines are some paid solutions or can be created as well for free. So yeah, good question. So virtual machines on Azure or any other cloud solution provider are paid because there is a compute, there's a network, there's a storage associated to it. You can, if you want to try and test it for free, you can create a GitHub. Maybe sorry, you can create an Azure students free account to try and test a virtual machine or maybe some other services in Azure. You get something around 200 credits. So that's something that's good for you to get started. I think the
oh,
next question was also from Farhan,
yeah,
which mentions
yeah.
you also get free Azure credits monthly with an MSTN account. Yes, yeah. And also for students, you can leverage the Azure free for students package that allows you to get a $200 credit. Yeah. Okay, I'll move ahead with the next set of topics. So, as I'll reiterate, Virtual machine has different families of SKUs, so you can use virtual machines for a general purpose use case. You can use you have a different SKU of family for a compute optimized scenario where you need more compute and maybe less of RAM. So these SKU or family of virtual machines are more aligned towards compute usage. There's similarly for memory and I mean there's something for memory. There's something for storage optimized, wherein you need more storage but not as much as CPU and memory. Okay, now there are specific families of virtual machine that supports GPU. So if you, in case you want to use some GPU accelerated, or maybe some graphic based workloads, that's where you can use a N series virtual machine. There's something called as high performance compute. So let's say you want to perform a high performance compute based workloads or need an application that requires an HPC based virtual machine. You can use an H series virtual machine. This is just a limited set of virtual machine families that I just enlisted over here, while the list is pretty exhaustive, and that's what you can see on the Azure portal. As already said, to spin up a virtual machine, you need a couple of resources. You need networking, you need storage, you need a disk, you need, let's say, monitoring. Okay, you might also require backup in a production environment. That's all. So, I mean, you need to take into consideration these things before you plan out a virtual machine. And on top of it, what are the different workloads can you run on it? So as already, I mean, if you remember, I had discussed this in detail in the previous sessions, wherein we talked about IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS, right? So virtual machine comes as a IaaS solution. Now this means you can create a virtual machine. The virtual machine is being provided to you. The bare metal server is something that is being managed by Azure, while the operating system, the application, the code, the data that is running on top of these virtual machines is something that you own, so you can control yourself. While if it's a PaaS, that's where the operating system, or obviously the container or the runtime environment, is something that is controlled or being managed by the cloud solution provider, and you are responsible for running the application code and the data on top of it, right? So the more like you move to the IaaS, the the management part of it is more flexible to you as an end user, and you can manage things more, and vice versa on the PaaS side. So it suits different customer scenarios and different needs for users. Some, for let's say, don't want to manage the entire operating system, the application and stuff like that. So I just want an environment wherein I can run my application code. So I might choose a PaaS-based service. Okay. Having said that, what are the different options that you can leverage in order to spin up your virtual machines? Okay, so as already said, there's something called as Azure Resource Manager template, or ARM template. It's an infrastructure as a code that you can use to deploy an Azure virtual machine. I'll show you quickly how it works. Even you can deploy an Azure virtual machine using PowerShell commands. You can use Azure CLI, which is compatible with both PowerShell and Bash. So you can also use Azure CLI as a command line interface to define your virtual machine specification and spin up a virtual machine at the same time. Both the Azure PowerShell and the CLI uses the REST API. So also, let's say you want to use the bare menu of REST API, and even the portal also uses the REST API at the backend. So this is what the baseline on which you can also use, and you can deploy and manage your virtual machines. Also, at the same time, you think about it, like, let's say you want to write a code, application code that spins up a virtual machine. Maybe it can be a .NET, Java, or maybe a Python-based code. So you can also use the client SDK library, and you can you can spin up a virtual machine. Yeah. We already covered the demo, so in the interest of the time, I will move to the next part of the session. I'll talk about the availability for virtual machine. How do you plan availability for the virtual machine? So I talked about the availability set, right? Availability set, as already said, is and a logical segmentation within a single data center of different fault domains and update domains, and you define how many fault domains do you want to replicate your resources to, or how many update domains do you want to replicate. And this is a business consideration, and this is driven totally based on your need of how highly available do you want your solution to be in? Ideally, the best practice is always to spin up your virtual machines across availability zones, not in an availability set, but in availability zones, so that at least when a single data center, the entire data center is down, your resources are still available and accessible to you, right? Now, the next thing that you would be really enthusiastic to know about is virtual machine scale sets. Now, what is virtual machine scale sets? We know about virtual machines, right? But what is virtual machine scale sets? Now, imagine you want to spin up or you want to run an application workload on top of a virtual machine, a bare metal logical virtual machine. But at the same time, you know that a single virtual machine might not suffice the need. Why? Let's say it's an e-commerce platform, and at a particular point in time in the day, maybe 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. in the day, the traffic rises drastically. At the same time, during the other period, maybe in the afternoon hours between 1 to 4 p.m., 1 to 4 p.m., you really don't get much traffic, right? That's where you want to dynamically scale up and scale down your virtual machines. Now, the option that lies with you is to either scale vertically or scale horizontally. What does this mean? When you want to scale up vertically, which means that you increase the skew, you increase the capacity of the single virtual machine that you are using. While the other option is to scale horizontally, which means that you want to spin up the similar instances of virtual machines, or maybe a different instance of the virtual machine. You would also, in parallel with the existing set of resources that you already have. You don't want to upgrade it, right? And in a practical scenario, it is much efficient to scale horizontally in an organization, because obviously you're not touching the existing environment, you're creating parallel resources on top of it, right? So that's where virtual machine scales is a really effective tool. And let me just go over here to the Azure portal and show it to you. Okay, you see the virtual machine has been created. Let me just quickly show you the virtual machine scale sets and how does it look like.
Saurav, we also have few questions, so whenever you are up, we'll just take those
Mhm.
questions.
Sure thing. Okay, I'll choose as the most logical the containers that I have to define, the subscription, the resource group, and then I provide my virtual machine scale sets. Okay, I'll give it a name as VMSS admin, as we are doing it for the Azure Administrator exam. Just kidding. Okay, so I choose my region and the availability zone. So let's say I want to spin it across two availability zones, which is 1 and 2. Okay, in Central India region. Then I chose the orchestration mode, whether I want to choose orchestration mode as flexible, which allows us to achieve high availability at scale, okay, by using multiple virtual machines, or I can use a uniform, which is, a large scale of stateless workloads, which means that the workloads will be provisioned for you. At that point in time. Okay, so I'll choose the flexible, which is much more suitable, and then I define the scaling mode. That's where this is where you define how your horizontal scaling works. So either you can define based on a metrics. That is where you define auto scaling based on a specific CPU metric or maybe on a particular condition. Okay, now you can configure the scaling metrics on what condition would you like to scale. Let's say if the CPU threshold increases to 80%, that's where you want to you want to create a new instance of it. Okay, and you want to also define certain other conditions as well. You want to enable diagnostic logs and stuff like that. Okay, now I'll go with the default as of now. You can also define manually update the capacity. Okay, which means you define the scaling count. You can provide as many counts, and it will spin it up on demand for. It will spin it up for you. But I choose auto scaling over here. I choose the base operating system image that I want to use to spin up my virtual machine, and I'll go with the standard configuration. Maybe I'll choose a lower skew over here just to ensure that I don't incur unnecessary cost in my demo environment. And I'll choose the key that is required to access my virtual machine. Now, okay, there is something called as Azure Spot virtual machines. There's a separate altogether topic, but think of it like that. These are on demand accessible virtual machines which are accessible to you at a very discounted rate, but at the same time can be evicted at any time. There's an SLA of less than 30 seconds to for these virtual machines to be evicted. So these are only for scenarios wherein you want to run these for a maybe stateless workload which does not require the data to be stored in, right? So yeah, I can choose this because I'm doing a demonstration, and I choose the disk which is as conventional as the virtual network. I'll choose the networking. Important thing over here, since we are spinning up multiple virtual machines, how does the request get redirected to a single virtual machine instance, right? So that's where I'll think about using a load balancer. I need a layer for load balancer that can redirect traffic to at least one of these single virtual machine among the set of virtual machine that are run within this virtual machine scale set. And I go with the default, the management health. I want to enable a health monitoring, application health monitoring. I don't want an automatic repair. That is also something that you can think about. And I'll just go ahead and review and create. Maybe it's asking me to provide some more details over here. Okay, select a load balancer. I'll create a fresh load balancer, which will be a layer 4 load balancer in my scenario. Okay, I will give it a name as admin LB. Yeah, which stands for load balancer. I want to make it a public load balancer or maybe an internal load balancer since I do not have an access to publish a public IP. I'll provide the load balancing rule as front end port should be 80, so backend port can also be 80. I can make a change in the backend port as well to ensure NAT based load balancing. Okay, and again I can create it, and I'll create review and create. And that's the process of creation of a virtual machine scale set. Now, initially, as per my scaling condition count, one single virtual machine will be spinned up within this scale set. While if I go ahead and based on my workload increases, the traffic to the virtual machine increases, and if my conditions are met, it will automatically provision more set of virtual machines to cater to the inbound traffic that is coming to these virtual machines. I choose not to create as of now, as it will incur unnecessary cost. I'll come back. I'll now address the questions that you might have. So, Rashmita, would you like to just
Yeah,
bring up the
yeah.
questions?
So yes, I'm bringing up.
Okay, I think they are after that you create those VMs, but do not have them active, only paying when activated. And us, is that possible? Okay, yeah, this is a great scenario, and thanks for that question. So think about a scenario, and I've seen this working with multiple people. They spin up the virtual machines, and you're continuously incurring cost for those virtual machines, right? And you're not using it for the entire duration. Let's think you spend up a virtual machine for the entire month and you are not really using it. And that's where there's a separate offering on Azure which is called as flexible compute or serverless compute. Now, what does it mean? You're not owning the virtual machine, you're not owning the infrastructure. There's no specific dedicated disk or storage being assigned to you, but you provide your application code and you're running it on demand. What does that mean? So you are getting incurred for the time that you use, the compute that you use and the storage that you use, only for the duration that you're using it, you are incurring that cost. So this is a great use case when you can think about a flexible server or a flexible compute usage, or something that we call as serverless. On Azure, we have two offerings, which is Function App or a Logic App. Function App is more related when you want to run an application code. A Logic App is a no-code, low-code based solution wherein you can define your own workflow and you can run it based on demand. These are event-based triggers.
Okay, next question.
Oh, Okay, the question is, does having AC-104 have help getting a job? This is a very debatable question. But if in case you want to seek my perspective, um, I really doubt that. But if you are a beginner, for sure, AZ-104, having an AZ-104 really adds a lot of weightage to your profile. If you're an experienced, I think this is a bare minimum requirement that you should have it. So anyways, it is always good to have, and you should do it.
I think somebody from the audience, Zenith, also agrees the same, and he or she probably have also answered
Mhm.
to the question. So, yeah, you sum it up. So, the next is the same
Okay.
question again.
I'm just loving the question. So, how many years of Azure exposure is needed to be good at Azure? Trust me, my friend, I've been working on Azure for a good number of years, and I have my colleagues who are working even for a decade. Okay, so Azure is continuously evolving, and there's no stoppage to it. So, I would say minimum you should have a good experience. I would call you as a good experienced guy on Azure. And it really means when you have explored all the services, almost all of the services or major services, number one, you also know how those services are working, what are the break fixes that you can apply when a particular configuration does not work for you. So there are a lot of nuances to it. At the same time, there is no boundary or there's no limitation on, hey, that you need these many years of experience. It's totally based on how well did you leverage the platform and do you know the best practices on top of it. Yeah.
That's awesome. I think that's about it. And yeah, you can continue.
Okay. A very interesting next part of it, right? Somebody mentioned that, hey, I don't want to, manage the entire virtual machine myself. I'm interested to run the application code on top of it. And that's where we talk about Azure App Service Plans. So, what is the Azure App Service Plan? Well, Azure App Service Plan is a regional resource or a service on Azure that hosts certain set of compute-based resources. Now, what is these compute-based resources? Is it a VM? Well, no. When you talk about an app service plan, it is a PaaS-based solution, a platform as a service offering. Now, what does it mean? You define the operating system, you define the region, you define the pricing tier or the SKU, the pricing tier and the SKU, we'll talk about it in a later point. The number of instances that you want to spin up, the size of the instances, that means that you have a dedicated, sizes and the instances being created for you, and it's already dedicated and being reserved for you. Now, on top of it, you define your application code or you define your application and you just simply run it. Really don't need to manage the size, the sizing, the operating system, and stuff like that. It's just that you provide your configuration that, hey, Azure, I want to run my workloads on a Linux virtual machine of this particular sizes with these many instances, and just provide it to me in this particular region. And I want to quickly just run my application code on top of it, and that's where it provides you the much more flexibility, right? And this is specific for a scenario wherein you don't want to manage your workloads. Okay, now, talking about the different SKUs that are available within app service plan, I also talked about the various compute resources so that you can run on top of it. What are these compute resources? Well, think about it like a web app being run, right? You either it can spin up a web app on an infrastructure as a service virtual machine, right? That is also an option available to you. But at the same time, you really don't want to manage the operating system, the patching and stuff like that. And that's where you provide that, hey, these are my configuration that is required. And man, I want to just simply spin up my application on top of it, right? That's where you can use a web app. You can use a web app plus a database. You can spin up of something called as functions app, which we talked about as a serverless solution for compute. You can think about an app service plan hosting an ad logic app. A logic app is a workflow that you define, a no code, low code based workflow. For those of you who don't really love coding and want to design a workflow for an automation solution, you can think of a logic app as a solution. It has multiple connectors, almost 1,000 plus connectors that you can use. So it is a great solution for you. So coming to the different tiers that you can use or different SKUs that you can use in an app service plan. So the first category is your shared compute. This also hosts a free tier, and someone who is really looking to test out how an app service plan works, what are the different offerings within it, you can use the free tier. And there's something also called as shared tier. These are two the base tiers of the app service plan. Again, since it's a shared compute, which means there is no dedicated VM that is assigned to you. There's no dedicated storage or network that is assigned to you at the backend in Azure data center level. But more nonetheless, you have a shared compute resource being allocated to you. You have a dedicated CPU quotas, you have some amount of storage and networking being assigned to you. Now, when I move to a more upper environment, which means a dedicated compute, which means I have a dedicated Azure VM underlying on which I can run my app services. So the base different tiers that are available over here is basic, standard, premium, premium V2, and premium V3, which means the more upgraded version or the tier that you choose, a better dedicated VM is getting assigned to you for a greater set of workloads. And again, a premium V3 also supports something called as reserve instances. So that is again leverage that you can use on top of these dedicated compute tiers. Now there is something called as isolated tier. Just think about a banking or a finance sector, or maybe a government based body. Okay, they are really concerned about the data that is being stored in my app service plans, or maybe on my app service apps. I don't want to share it. Neither do I want to keep it on a dedicated compute, but that can be accessible by, or maybe that is vulnerable at the same time. Since it's in underlying Azure, it should not be vulnerable. That's Azure's responsibility. But at the same time, when you have data concerns like these, you always want to choose an isolated tier. What is the benefit of using an isolated tier? You have a dedicated set of virtual machine. You have your own dedicated virtual network, which is isolated for you and which helps you isolate your application workloads that are running on these dedicated VMs, right? And again, you can use leverage the maximum scale out capabilities when you are in the isolated tier. So let's quickly jump to the portal, and I'll show you each of them step by step. Here we go. Let's go to the home, and I will select app service plan. There you go. So you can just type in app service plan and on the portal, and you should be able to see it. I don't know why this is popping up multiple times. Yeah, you can click on app service plan, and that's where you see. Now I'll go ahead. Now this app service plan is like a plan that you define that, hey, these many VMs are, or maybe these many vCores are something that is dedicated for me. And this is not where you actually run your workloads. You can, on top of these app service plan, these are like containers. On top of these containers, you define your application workload. And I'll show you each of them as we move ahead. So we choose the resource group. Maybe I'll create a separate resource group, which means AZ app services service RG. That sounds good to me. And I'll create a plan, which means app service plan. I don't think so. It supports a space. So I'll have to give it some hyphens, and that looks good to me. I'll choose the location wherein I want to run my app service plan. I'll choose Central India, which is closest to me. I can let it be on Linux. And then I choose a pricing tier. This pricing tier defines what is the SKU of the virtual machine that you want to use, or the set of virtual machine that you want to use. And again, also the pricing that is associated to it, right? So if you just select the free tier for now, just to ensure that I get the least price or the no price at all, and then I can select the redundancy option. Let's say I chose maybe a standard or a basic tier, and even the basic tier does not support the zone redundancy, I'll choose a premium tier, and that's where I can enable a zone redundancy. And a production environment, it's very important that I enable a zone redundancy to ensure my application workloads are highly available. And then I can create, I can provide tags, and I can review and create. So the size is extra small, or the number of weak CPUs is 195 in my app service plan. Now I can create app services on top of it, which helps me leverage these app service plan. Okay, the resource has been spent up. Now, let's quickly check on a few of them as we move ahead. Now, the instance count is 3. My pricing plan is P0V3, which is premium V3. It shows me the total usage in terms of the CPU, memory, the data out, data in. And if you want to see more metrics for any of the resources, you can go to the monitoring tab within the metrics, and you will be able to see these many metrics on which you can see how your resource is performing. Okay, this is again very important for from a monitoring perspective. So each of the services has these capabilities of monitoring, which can be consolidated together and can be seen in a service called as Azure Monitor. Huh? Now, if I go to the networking, I should be able to see what are the different networking options. If I want to integrate with another virtual network, I can use the VNet integration options and stuff like that. I can see what are the applications that are running on top of it. Since I don't have anything as of now, I'll not see anything over here. But an important thing that I wanted to show you is the scale up and scale out feature within App Service Plan. As I already said, this is an platform as a service. Now it provides you the flexibility to provide a scale up as per the need. Now you define that, hey, this is what is my current usage. Maximum scale capacity is 30, current instance is 3, memory GB is this much, and my current plan is this. This is based on the pricing tier that I chose. I can change my pricing tier as I intend to do. So for the dev tier and the production tier, you have different set of pricing tiers that you see over here. Now let me go back to my app service plan, the scale out option. I can also define automatic scale out. So over here, if you see the scale out methods can be manual, based on which I define what is the instance count that I want, 3, 10, 15, so on and so forth, based on my need. I'll keep it to minimum as of now, 3. I can define automatic based scale out, which means I define that, hey, if my CPU metrics, my performance metrics, my RAM usage, my storage usage goes this much, reaches a particular threshold, then you scale out. Okay, this is a metric based scaling up. Then there is something called as rule-based scaling up. What does this mean? I know my e-commerce application is supposed to receive X amount of traffic between 8 to 9 p.m. That's where I define a rule that, hey, between 8 to 9 p.m., spin up the number of spin up the number of instances to 10. While during the lean time, I want to keep it minimum, which is 3, which is the minimum required, since I chose a zone available option, a zone redundant option. So similarly, I can choose automatic scaling. I'll click on save, and the minimum instance will always be 3 over here because I chose a zone redundant. Haven't I choose a non-zone redundant option, then it could have been 1 or 2 as well. Okay, let me get back to my slide and talk about the next topic. I hope this is not getting too much of knowledge stores for you. So just with me. We talked about app service plan. Now we'll talk about Azure App Services. And this is the actual service that allows you to spin up your web applications and the different other applications that you want to run on top of these app service plans. Now, what is app service? Okay, so an Azure App Service is something, a web app or an application that you can run on top of these app service plan. This would have its own public IP and FQDN. You can assign an FQDN as well, which appears something like this, which is 1 minute. Let me bring on my pointer. Yeah, something like this, which acts as your app service name, .azure websites.nem, so which means this would be like a public web app. You can run a lot of application workloads of different runtime environment. It could be a .NET framework based, maybe a Node.js, a Python application, a PHP application, Ruby application, Java, and whatnot. You can. It also supports a different versions of each language or the runtime stack. You can spin up a Linux or a Windows-based app service plan. You can choose the pricing tier as I showed you for the app service plans as well. You can choose the pricing tier for Azure App Service apps. Okay, what is more on top of it? Now, you would have heard about continuous integration and continuous deployment. That's where, again, you can leverage your Azure App Services for implementing not only manual based deployment options, which wherein you can just provide a zip file, or maybe a folder, or maybe, let's say, a OneDrive based folder, or maybe pull out some or pull in some maybe images from your GitHub or some container registries. But there are much more better options wherein like you can leverage GitHub repositories to continuously push or commit your code to the main branch or the release branch, and it can automatically the app service can automatically integrate with GitHub and pull your code changes and deploy it to a website. You can use other code repositories like Bitbucket and stuff like that. You can use a local Git repository. You can also use something called as Azure Repos, which is VCS within Azure itself. That is available to you as a part of the Azure DevOps, right? So I think both GitHub and Azure Repos serves a great use case when you want to integrate and want to implement a continuous integration and continuous deployment using Azure App Services. Having said that, let's get to the demo directly. Okay, I'll now go to my home and I will spin up an Azure App Service. I'll have to remove this. App service, there you go. And now when I try to create an app service, I have all these many options. I can create a web app. I can create a static web app as well. I can create a web app plus a database, which is like a database. Think of it as a 3-tier or 2-tier application. Okay, and or maybe also a WordPress on app service. Isn't that cool? So yes, it is. So let's quickly get started with one of the options, which is web app. Okay, so I'll choose my resource group. I'll choose the existing app service RG. I'll define my name as admin web app. Okay, and I'll choose what I want to use. Either I can choose to pull a container, okay, which is one of the option, or maybe I want to deploy my code. If I want to deploy my code, I provide what is the runtime environment that I want to use. So this is the platform as a service offering, right? Wherein you define that, hey, Azure, provide me a runtime environment which has these many specifications, and I'm just solely responsible for running my application code on top of it. So that's where I can choose a tech stack, let's say maybe Python 3.12, let's say it's a Flask application, and then I can choose the operating system, either a Linux or a Windows. I can choose the region wherein I want to deploy. Maybe I'll go with Central India. Okay, you need to be a bit careful while deploying these resources, because few of the resources might not be there in specific regions, while app services is a general and a major resource, so it should be available. Now it asks me to choose an app service plan, so it either I create an app service plan or use an existing one. So I already created an app service plan. I'll use the same, and the pricing tier is shown over here. By default, the zone redundancy is enabled because I enabled the zone redundancy at the app service plan level, right? And so again, you can use several other options that are available. So you deploy your app with a database or maybe a cache where it is. I'll just go with the bare minimum over here. Now I want to choose the deployment option. That's where the CI/CD comes in over here. CI would be part of the repository that you are using, maybe Git or Azure Repos, while I can define how the deployment happens. So basically, I can connect my GitHub repository. I can provide my organization. I can use a Azure DevOps repository or maybe a GitHub repository. I can authorize and I can, hey, tell that, hey, pull in all the code from here as and when it gets committed to a particular branch. Okay, so you can provide a branch and stuff like that. You can also define what is the authentication method, because obviously in an organization you would not have a default authentication method. So you can also define the authentication method over here. For the sake of simplicity, I'll just quickly disable this. You can choose a repository. I'll define the networking on how my app service should be accessible. Is it the publicly accessible app service? Is it something that, and if it is publicly accessible app service, I should enable a network injection. I can define what virtual network on should be, should allow access to this app service and stuff like that. I'll go with the default configurations as of now, and I'll quickly create my resource. Now, there's also a very important feature which is called as application insights. Now, when you think of deploying a web app, you also want to enable monitoring, right? Because think of an application, a web application, you want to always monitor how the resource traffic comes in. Let's say if it is, the usage increase, you also want to scale it up, right? You want to know if there was a DDoS attack, what was it, how did your application react to it? If there was a high traffic usage, how did your application react to it? What is the number of requests that comes to it and stuff like that? What is the data that moved out? What is the data that came in and stuff like that? So all of these you can enable using application insights. You can define an application insights. You can create a region. I'll just go with the default as of now, and I'll create it. I can provide my tags, and that's where I create it. Interesting, right? Now just think of it like, once I create it, either I can use my GitHub repository, I could have easily integrated and I can deploy it. I can use CI/CD to directly, publish my web application using those GitHub codes. Okay, or I can use a manual deployment option, which I'll show you directly over here. Meanwhile, if you have any question, I would love to take it. Meanwhile, the resource gets deployed.
We are good, Saurav. We don't have any questions, so yeah, you can continue.
Okay. Okay. I'll wait. Yeah, that's where my resource is deployed. And now the interesting part of it. I already have my app service up. Now I can go to browse and I can see that, hey, my resource, what it seems, oops, I'll need to check my app service. It's still loading up. Okay, let's give it a minute. There you go, the default domain. So I'll just go ahead and it will open up a blank page, because obviously I don't have anything in my code right now, right? So I'll now go, if let's say I want to provide a deployment, I want to do a manual deployment on my Python 3.12 environment, runtime environment, I can go ahead, I can go to, I'll just quickly bring up on all the tabs. If you see the different deployment slots, I can create deployment slots like a release, test branch, dev environment, stuff like that. Okay, I can provide my code configurations. I can leverage scale out and scale up plans that I already showed you in the app service environment, and stuff like that. Okay, so let's say I'll give it a name as dev. So this will come as dev.adminweb.dev slash Azure websites.net. Okay, and I want to clone it, and so either I can create a slot, which is a clone environment of the existing slots. So ideally, my production, my dev would be a clone of the production. My UAT would be a clone of my dev, something like that. So that is, again, you can leverage. You can manually provide your code base within the deployment slots, and you can spin up your web application. So this is amazing, and this is a great feature that you have on Azure, right? Now, again, in the interest of time, I'll just go back to my slides and talk about the last service that we have in hand for today. Somebody said, hey, I don't want to leverage my infrastructure. I don't want to leverage, or don't want to manage my VM. That's where you have something called as Azure Container Instances. What is this container instances? Now you would have heard about Kubernetes cluster. You would have heard about pods, nodes, containers. What is this containers? Containers, if you just imagine, and if you just realize, containers are being used heavily in terms of the shipping or the dockyards, right? So the containers is a full packed environment, or I would say full packed set of required configurations or resources that are required to be spin up in my environment to run a particular application workload. Right now, in Azure, either you can run up a container using something called as AKS, Azure Kubernetes Services, or if you just don't want to manage your Kubernetes cluster, Azure says that, hey man, you have the flexibility. You can use container instances, and this is the most flexible way you can run your application code. You can define the specific network. You can define the size on the of the container on which you want to store or you want to run your application. You can define your own public IP, DNS, and stuff like that. You can spin up and spin, maybe delete a resource on demand. You don't have to really manage a virtual machine in the behind. Think about the storage perspective as well. You can use a file share. You can define your own storage options. You can define the container environment like a Linux, Windows operating system, and the container environment on top of it. That you want to run your application on. So the container environment has been defined by the container image. Okay, so you would need a container image that is being pulled by a container registry or some Docker registry, and once you have spinned up, you can run your application code on top of it. This is the most flexible option. You think about it, you don't really need to manage a Kubernetes cluster, because in a Kubernetes cluster you'll need to think about security, networking, stuff like that. And in a container instance, it is just that the container that you are managing. So getting back to my Azure environment, and just bear with me. This is going to be the last demonstration for today. So I know I have been putting up a lot of information in a single session. So get back to me if you have any question, and I'll be happy to answer. Now I come to my container instance. You can just go to this over here, container instances, and that's where the resource is. I don't really need to manage my Kubernetes cluster. I'll just go ahead, I'll create a container instance, and I'll show you what are the different configurations that are required. As minimum, the traditional, the container instance. Okay, so I'll choose my AC container RG. I'll provide a container name, which will be my admin app container. Okay, and I'll provide the region as Central India. I can choose an availability zone. Again, this is very important. I need to, even if I'm running a container, I need to know that, hey, I'm running a container and it can get down anytime, right? I need to ensure the resiliency and the high availability of it. Still, hybridity is a very important part, right? You cannot ignore. So I want to ensure that even if there is a data center level failure, my container is still running in some of the other availability zones in the same region. That's where I want to ensure that my availability zones is picked to 3. So I spin up my container instances in 3 availability zones in a single region. I'll choose the SKU that I want to select. So I'll go with the standard SKU. You can choose confidential computing as well, which ensures that the container is completely isolated. And this is very useful when you think about education, healthcare, finance, or maybe a government-based workloads. Yeah, and then you can choose the emote source. As I already said, you can choose a Azure Container Registry, which is your own Azure-based container registry environment, container registry like GitHub repo for images, container images. So you can store, you can build your container images, and you can pull your container images on demand. Okay, you can publish it to a public repository as well, a public registry as well. Now, when you talk about other registries, you can use a Docker-based registry. You can use any other registry as well. You can connect to it and you can directly access it. While Azure also says that, hey, man, if you don't have a container image available with you, spin up a container image that is available to you directly as a gallery container image. So I do not have a container image. So I'll just go ahead and I'll spin up a container image from the available options. So if you see the simple hello world container, sample Linux web server, or a sample Windows web server, maybe I'll choose a sample Linux web server, and I see the configuration. It will spin up an Nginx container with a 1.915 Alpine based version, and I provide what is the size of the container on which I want to run my application upon. This is very important because I want to ensure that my application is compatible to run on a particular container that I define. Second, when the traffic increases, it is able to maintain and as well as adhere to the needs of the application. So I can choose the bare minimum as of now, but it is very important that you define your container size, and then you choose the networking option. How do you want your container to be accessible? Is it something that is public? Is it over the private network, or you don't want your container to be directly accessed? Okay, you can use a private endpoint or some scenarios like that. Now you want to also define what is the ports that you want to allow that container. So let's say HTTP, which is HTTP, which is port 80, and the HTTPS, which is port 443, is what I want to allow the my container to be accessed from using these protocols. Then I can define my monitoring. I can go to advanced, and I can give a tag, and I can create. Don't miss a tag. Tag is a metadata, and you cannot miss that. So that's very important. For the sake of demonstration, I'm just I'm missing that, but it's very important as well. Okay, so yeah, that's where my container instances are getting provisioned. Meanwhile, if you have any questions, or that's a wrap for today. I hope, by the time it gets deployed, it will take some time, but by the time it gets deployed, I'll just quickly give the mic over to Rashmita to take it forward. If you have any other questions, or feel free to connect with me on the various platforms. And I really love this session today. Thank you so much for the time that you put on viewing my contents. Yeah.
Thank you so much, folks. I will highly recommend, please scan the QR code. I think, that's where you will get connected with Saurav. And I'm sure in today's session, it was loaded with content. So, in case if you want to, reach out, or if you have any doubt, personal, professional, please feel free to reach out. And with that, yes, we do also have another QR code for today's session. Please do share your feedback about today's session. It will actually help us to curate future sessions. You can scan the QR code and then put the event ID, which is 24653. And yeah, thank you so much, Saurav, for hosting this amazing session. And thank you all for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Thank you so much.